That's as close as we get.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Drummers Education Connection. My name is Jeremy Steinkohler. I'm here with two great friends, just awesome dudes and fantastic drummers and educators. Bart Robley down in Southern California, Chip Ritter, Tucson, Arizona. Not here today is our fourth compatriot, Rick Stojak, who had some business to deal with this morning, but we miss him, and he's here in spirit. And we heard him drumming in our minds because he usually drums us in when we start our show. And I am pleased to let you know that we have a terrific guest on today. His name is Dinesh Joseph from Dragonfly Percussion. Welcome, Dinesh. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Dinesh is a classical percussionist who works as a percussionist in the Buffalo Symphony in New York. And is that right? Did I say that
Buffalo
right?
Philharmonic, yeah.
Sorry, Buffalo Philharmonic.
All right.
And also the founder and I guess CEO and all the, dustbin emptier.
Yeah, exactly. It's a partnership with my wife, Janine.
Yeah. Of a company called Dragonfly Percussion. And I came upon Dragonfly on the internet and thought their stuff was super duper cool. Dinesh was kind enough to send me a couple of samples to demo at Deck Day a few weeks ago. They make, well, you'll tell us all about it, but we want to dive into Dragonfly and what that's all about, and also your work as a percussionist and your background. And I know you went to Juilliard, is that right? As a concert percussionist?
Yep, that's correct. I did my undergraduate there about 20 some years ago now. It's been a spell. But yeah, I mean, it was incredible. It was extremely formative. It's actually where Dragonfly sort of started. Was when I was a student there. I was kind of tinkering with various materials, and I was always sort of making my own stuff and wrapping mallets and sort of messing around with various designs just as a hobbyist, really, and just because I had no money, you know what I mean. So it was like a way to to kind of like make it's like bass drum mallets are expensive, so I made my own, and then I ended up making one particular, very kind of like highly specialized little pair of bell mallets that are really good for one specific little orchestral excerpt that you have to play on, sort of any audition you take. You have to play this little piece. And so I made these mallets, and they were really good for that. And all my, my colleagues there at the time were like, "Hey, Nash, these are good. Like, you actually made something good." And and so on a lark, I sent a pair to Steve Voice Music, because this was like maybe year 2000, like somewhere between 99 and 2001 is when this was sort of blowing down. So it was like right at the very beginning of e-commerce, but not quite there yet, And so I sent these to Steve Voice on a lark, and then like a week later, I get a message on my answering machine from Steve Weiss being like, "Hey, we got your mallets, and we like them. Give me a call." And so I called him, and I talked to Steve, and he was great. He was super positive and said, "These are great. Send us 50 pairs." And I was like, "Jesus, 50 pairs!" Oh my God. And then he really sort of guided me from there. He was like, you can't just make one pair of mallets, and he sort of pointed me in the right direction with like a bunch of industrial supply catalogs, and said, "Try this, try that," and sort of really encouraged me to go further, than just the singular pair of sticks. And there was this interesting at Juilliard in the percussion department. There's sort of these 4 big studios that were at one time were inhabited by, well, never at this building, but it used to be Roland Koloff, and still Dan Druckmann's still there. Gordon Gottlieb was in one of them, and we'd practice in all these big studios and take lessons in there. But then there was sort of a corridor that connected them. You know what I mean? That only percussionists had access to, and in there was this little sort of a little workshop space with a workbench and some shelves. And so I kind of posted up in there, and I bought like a cheap drill press and just started kind of using it as a workspace, and started sending stuff to Steve Weiss, and I managed to weasel my way into Steve Weiss's last print catalog, which was,
really,
I think it was their 2001 or 2002 catalog, and that was really like a real plum, because it was still when players were that's how you buy. If you were an orchestral player, that's where you got your mallets. You know what I mean? It was the only place to get sort of pro grade stuff.
Hmm.
And so everybody had the catalog. And so because I got in there and I priced them stupid cheap. I mean, my mallets were like $12 a pair.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like and I really wasn't turning a profit if I really, I'm sure if I crunched all the numbers, but at the time it's like, look, I'm a 20-year-old kid. I want to win a job in an orchestra, but I may as well get people interested. You know what I mean? Like I may as well, and it's a new product. I may as well persuade people to buy them by making them really inexpensive. And it kind of worked out exactly as I planned, because then I went to grad school and you know, Dragonfly very quickly fell onto the back burner, because once you sort of set your mind to winning a job in an orchestra, that's kind of all you can do. Right. Like it's really hard to win a job. You know, even a small orchestra like the Buffalo Philharmonic, it's like, you know, you're competing behind a screen against a bunch of players, and it's a huge laundry list of music that they want you to prepare.
I imagine it takes a long time.
Yeah, the preparation process for orchestral auditions is extremely arduous. So I sort of devoted myself to that. I got really lucky. I won the Buffalo Philharmonic job, you know, shortly thereafter in 2003. And then, you know, then I had a job that I had to do. You know, I had to get tenure, and it was like I was a really young and experienced player. So for a number of years, it was just like take auditions, practice for work, do the job, you know. And then it was, my wife and I got married, and you know the story. You know, you buy a house and you have kids. And so then a number of years later, like over a decade after I first started Dragonfly at Juilliard, you know, all that time, two things have been happening. You know, once I got to the Buffalo Phil, I'm doing the job with the orchestra, and I kept finding like, hey, I don't have the right tool. We're playing such and such piece, and for whatever reason, I'm struggling to make the sounds I want to make. And so I'd go home and I'd think about it and be like, I think it needs to be heavier or harder or this or that or the other. And I'd go home and I'd go to my basement and I'd like crank out some prototypes, and then I'd take them to work the next day and I'd try them out. And so I spent 10 years basically developing and designing and workshopping a lot of our sort of core product line, without that being the intention, right? I mean, I was doing this stuff just because
you were doing your own R&D, basically.
Exactly. It was for me to do my job with my orchestra. Yeah. And then, you know, but so that was the first thing, is that I spent 10 years not making mallets. I spent 10 years making mallets, you know, and then having this very like immediate, like, okay, we're playing Mahler 4, you know, or we're playing, you know, whatever piece, Rite of Spring or whatever. And it's like, okay, I need to play this cymbal part. And it's not working, and I think it needs to be this, that, or the other. And I'll go home and I'll make 2 or 3 different mallets. And then the next day I bring him in and I try it on the same cymbal in the same hall with the same group, and can go, oh, okay.
Trial by fire. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like this really efficient way to make changes and get to the right thing really fast. And then, so that was the one thing that was happening. The second thing is that I kept getting emails. I didn't have a website or anything, right? I mean, this was like, you know, I had Dragonfly Percussion at hotmail.com. I mean, that was the closest I had. And so, but I kept getting emails from players I'd never heard of, never met, being like, hey, are you still making those magic flute mallets? And can I, you know, I called Steve Weiss, they don't have your stuff anymore. You know, so there was clearly like still from all these years ago, these few little bell mallets I was making, there was just this sort of built-in, people kept wanting them. And so then it got to a point where, you know, we had one kid and the second on the way. My wife had, you know, quit her day job, you know, to raise our kids. And she was sort of getting a little restless. Like, what am I doing now with my life? And I said, look, if you're willing to partner with me, because, you know, I'm really good at designing mallets and I really like making them and I love playing them. But like, I am not a guy to keep books, you know, like I'm not a guy to do all the back end. But she's really great at that stuff. And so she said, yeah, let's try it, you know? And so It started off as we just sort of started, we relaunched in 2014, I think, with just like 5 mallets or 4 mallets, kind of the original ones I was selling through Steve Weiss that were a little bit updated. And then it quickly from there, it was like, okay, bell mallets, you know, suspended cymbal mallets, bass drum mallets, gong mallets, you know, xylophone mallets, marimba mallets, violin mallets. Wow. And it just grew and it grew and it grew. And then one of my pandemic projects, as you guys were talking about, you know, this podcast was kick drum beaters. Cause I was forged as a drum set player. I mean, it was interesting because I grew up in Cleveland, which is, a great orchestral town. It's got one of the world's great orchestras.
Right.
And it's got a great institution in the Cleveland Institute of Music that trains a lot of those musicians. And I fully, took advantage of those opportunities as a kid. But my first teacher was a guy named Andy Kubachevsky, who was a tremendous drum set player. He played with The and Stabbing Westward and toured with, he was like he at the time he was like, the session guy in Cleveland if it wasn't swing. But he went to CIM, so he was kind of this perfect guy that was like a great drum set player, but also had all the sort of concert percussion training and background and gave me this really balanced diet. But drum set was my first love. That was definitely the gateway drum for me. And so I'd always been playing drum set. I played drum set a lot with the orchestra, and I was just sort of, I every time I played drum set with the orchestra, I hated the beaters that were on the pedal. I just felt like the compressed felt was sort of very two-dimensional sound. I couldn't, and when you play with the orchestra, it's not like playing with a mic'd up rock band. It's just a totally different set of circumstances. We're often amplified, but it's just like you're surrounded by 7,500 musicians, half of whom are string players, and like you just have to play with a touch and a feel and a lightness that isn't really intuitive for most of us, and so I was finding the desire to like have, and often I'm playing like George Gershwin and Great American Songbook stuff with Bernstein, right? It's stuff that isn't supposed to be punchy and dry and you know what I mean? It's supposed to have a little. So I was finding myself taking the felt, the regular, like the DW compressed beater or whatever head was on the pedal, and like putting a layer of fleece over it, or I was kind of just modifying them just on the fly, or just putting a few layers of moleskin or something on it just to kind of soften it up. And then during the pandemic, I started thinking, I'm like, man, there's got to be a better. Got to be like, I was feeling sort of like there's just not good options, and I literally went onto Sweetwater one night and looked at every kick drum beater, every bass drum beater head they had for sale, and it was like they have 3 different beaters. There's 1,000 versions of 3 different beaters. There's compressed felt, the kind of standard compressed felt. Right. There's like a hard beater, like a wooden beater or a plastic beater. That's just like the really hard stuff. Or there's the lamb's wool Sherpa beater. Right. And that's kind of it. There's a few exceptions. Lowboy does really cool stuff, and they've been innovative. I'm not, but like for the most part, I was seeing variations on that theme.
Right.
And I thought, and like my whole playing percussion in an orchestra and having this mallet company was like what I'm selling and what I'm dealing with both as a player and as a vendor, so to speak, is timbre, right? I mean, I'm dealing with sound quality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of drummers miss that. A lot of drum set players miss that. That's such an critical part of how we produce the sounds and contribute to the music. Even if it's amplified rock and roll, the timbre matters a ton.
Absolutely.
And I can say just from the couple of beaters that you sent me, I did a quick. As soon as I got them, I went to my studio, and it was when I walked into one of my lessons, and I said, "Hey, let's check out these beaters together." And my student was all excited, and we put them all on and did A, B, C, D tests. And boy, the difference between them was striking.
Which one did you like best?
The flannel one was, and I had the
soft flannel kick drum.
There was a soft flannel one, and there was a
probably looked something like this, right? Like a gray fella.
I have that one, and you sent me a like a layered one made of felt pieces.
Yeah, or maybe leather. Yeah, they're all layered. All the beaters are made from, stacked layers of material.
That's the one right there.
Yeah, exactly. So
cool.
So this is canvas, right? So this is like 40 little discs, right, that we die cut. So you take canvas and you punch it out into these little circles, and then you stack up 40 of them, and then you're playing essentially with the edge, of the fabric. So the surface of the fabric is on top, and then by stacking up that many layers, you basically create a beating head.
Nice.
Dinesh, do you have a bunch right there that you could sort of show us real quick and talk about the differences?
Yeah, I mean, so I have all these different.
That's a
these are all
Bofty kick drum.
Yeah, this is the Bop Softy. So the idea is that by manipulating this material, so like this one is like leather. This isn't one we sell. This is a random prototype. Or then we have, some really big layers. Like this is just a version of the big Softy, which is the biggest and softest one we make. So we basically there's 3 or 4 materials that we use. And so like from hardest to softest is like the hardest one we use is veg tan leather, which is kind of a thick, like a saddle leather. And we do 4 or 5 or 6 layers of that tightly compressed together. And that's sort of our hardest beater. And then we use suede, which is obviously softer than the veg tan, but still can be a little punchy and clear. And then we go to the canvas, right, which is like this, which is, a little bit like denim, although it's not denim. It's just a cotton canvas, and that's
proprietary developed materials there.
yeah. Yeah. We have our own our own looms going in the back. Yeah. So then the canvas is a little softer than that. And then we go to flannel. Again, these are all weird prototypes I'm grabbing, but flannel is so this is like maybe 50 layers, of thinner, softer flannel. And then there's fleece, right? And the fleece is sort of the softest, and it's like a polar fleece, right? Like if you think of like a fleece jacket, it's basically that material. And that has the most volume and softness. And so the big Softy is all fleece. The Bop Softy is a combination of fleece and flannel. You know what I mean? So we by changing, the material and the diameter of those discs, and then also how tightly we compress them, right? So if you bear with me, I should have had more of these things at the ready. But so for instance, we make 2 different suede beaters. Let me see if hopefully I have some. Here we go. Yeah.
Hey, while you're looking for that, how big is your warehouse and your shop there?
I can give you a quick tour if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
But while I'm here, so like these are both suede. This is the Ulysses Owens, the UOJ signature beater, which is like really, really nice. And this is our regular suede beater. Different colors, but the same material. But this one sounds really different because the layers are much more tightly
compressed,
right? So it's a tighter thing. Whereas this one, they're a little looser, a little softer, a little more give. You know what I mean? So, so there's a bunch of. So by sort of, mixing and matching these various materials, and so the variables of size, of material, and of compression, I mean, I've got a lot of things to play with to create some really, really different sounds.
Now, everything you have here is very niche oriented and jazz, bop, orchestral, right?
Right.
Do you find that you just want to stay away from the ones, like you said, there's 3 standard beaters, hard plastic, wood, and compressed felt. Are you just trying to stay away from that because that's already out there and you don't need to reinvent the wheel?
Basically, yeah. I mean, so like our hardest beater, the leather beater, the hard leather, this is basically, this kind of overlaps with your standard felt beater.
Okay.
Except it sounds better. Okay. I can't stress this enough.
Actually, I'm going to want to get a couple after the show. We'll talk.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's I think it's got a fuller, bassier sound than compressed felt. But it functions in that same sort of hardness area, and that's as hard as we go. Because what I felt like is hard beaters, they've got covered.
Right.
Like if you're playing, with Dream Theater or Dave Matthews Band, and you need all that, if you need that kind of articulation, which is great. Like, man, there's so many beaters that you can get that are going to help you get there. Mm-hmm. And my one of my guiding principles with our business is like, if somebody's already making it, like, I don't need to make it. I'm not here to replicate something that's already there. We don't need more redundancy.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the orchestral drumming, when you were in the orchestra, what beater did you end up choosing?
So my go-to, So it depends on which era of music. So if we're playing,
okay.
so like, but if I'm playing, like Porgy and Bess, right? If I'm doing like sort of old timey Gershwin stuff, so I have like when it's like, older, like mid-century and earlier repertoire, Cole Porter and Gershwin and Richard Rodgers. I play a ton of Richard Rodgers, that kind of thing, like vintage Broadway and vintage, vaudeville stuff. This is my go-to. I have a beautiful old marching bass drum with calf heads that I rig up, and this is our extra large flannel. And it's actually got fleece on the inside and flannel on the outside, and it's a pretty big diameter. It's not quite as voluminous as the big softy, but I actually find that the big softy in the orchestra is actually a little too. I need a little more definition than that.
Oh, okay.
But I find that this one I have a little more. I can play it really soft and still have some clarity, but it's super warm.
Dinesh, do you on your website have or somewhere have a sound samples, like here's the A B C D E F G tests of all the different beaters and how they sound timbrally different?
Yeah, we have it on. I mean, I should check our YouTube. Our YouTube channel is a little bit of a disaster. It's there, but there's on our Instagram. You'll definitely find those. But if there's oh man, what's the fellow's name? I've made some in house that are great, but they're mostly on like bop drums and swing drums. But what's the name of his name is escaping me. He's got a whole drum tuning program. Kenny. I feel terrible that I can't think of his name.
Okay.
I'll think of it. And he did a great, he collaborates with Big Bang Distribution a lot. And I'll look him up when I'm back at my phone, but he did a great, like, back to back, and he's a really good drummer, and he had great audio, and he basically goes through the whole line, and it's really great.
Very cool.
So
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. So I'll try and link to that.
I'm just thinking about our audience and
Kenny Sheretz. His name is Kenny Sheretz.
Kenny Sheretz.
Yeah.
And
so
for those people who might be interested, a way to check them out, because the beaters are all very different. And I can imagine, reading a description is one thing, but hearing them is something entirely different to really get a sense of how they would fit with the kind of music you play.
Yeah.
We had a guest on. It's been a couple of years ago now, and I studied with him when I was in college. Robert Slack. He's the principal percussionist for the Pacific Symphony Orchestra.
Oh yeah, okay.
And he always told me, you have to be a percussionist in a symphony. I mean, he's echoing everything that you just said, about how behind the screen auditions and everything. And he said, you have to be groomed for it. It was the word that he used. You have to be groomed for this. It's a way different type of playing. And so I'm really excited to share this episode with him, if he's not watching right now, because he's you're like so in his wheelhouse. I mean, you guys are like, listening to you talk is like listening to him. And so I'm really excited about that.
The video that I found was Dragonfly Percussion Bass Drum Beater Collection Demo and Review by Kenny Sheretz. Is that the one we're talking about?
That's the one. Yeah,
I got it posted in the chat.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, Kenny's great. He's got a really cool channel. He's he's a rockin' player, and he does the demos like really. It's like very controlled, right? So you get a really clean sense of it.
Dinesh, I just have to say that one of the things I love about your story is that you were filling a need for yourself, right? You were wanting something to be able to express in your music, a tool, and you found that the tools that were on the market weren't cutting it. And so you sort of like, necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing. Just took it upon yourself to like, what if I play around with this? What if I play around with that? And then over time you develop these prototypes, and you yourself were the laboratory for your experimentation. And like you said, in real time, you'd go home and put something together and then bring it to the rehearsal the next day and be able to, say, oh, this needs a little less of this, a little more of that, or shape it differently, what have you. And that's to me like just such a beautiful thing. It's such a great attitude and spirit of like how you make things better for yourself and end up making things better for other people.
Thanks.
And so yeah, and I love it. And then this is
When
Vic
you-
Firth's story also.
Totally.
Yeah,
That's what I was gonna say.
absolutely.
Vic
That's
Vic
exactly
Firth,
right.
for those who don't know, was the Boston Symphony timpanist, I believe, and just found that
Yep.
the mallets that were on the market, they weren't working for him. So he
Mhm.
made his own. He had a lathe and figured out, and lots of prototypes. And then now Vic Firth is the biggest drumstick company on the market in the world.
Mhm.
And he started the same way you did. So
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
I think
Started
what I think is
making
cool
stuff in
is
his
that
garage.
what I think is cool is that you've got all these mallets and these kick drum beaters, and I just think about all the music that's being made right now with your stuff and how you've improved music. You know what I mean? That's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
yeah.
It is very cool. I mean, I love that as well. I mean, I love hearing guys and knowing that they're using my stuff. And
Right.
I've gotten the great feedback about the bass drum beaters in particular that that guys in the studio, the engineers love them because they're in there and they're trying to dial in all the mics and dial in the kick sound, and they go, "Hang on, let me just switch beaters," and they throw a different beater on it, and the guy's like, "Oh, that's it, cool,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
good,
Right
kick
on.
is set,"
Well-
and it's like it saves all this time instead of messing with the knobs.
Right.
They're able to like make drastic changes to the timbre, just by switching out the beater.
At
Can
the
you
instrument.
discuss for our younger audience? Can you discuss what is timbre? When you say timbre, what do you mean?
That is a great question, and I love answering it. So, if you have 5 different instruments, let's say you have a violin and a piano and a flute and a saxophone and a guitar, and they all play the same pitch. They all play A440, let's say. You can still tell that it's different instruments, right? Like you can tell the saxophone from a
Mhm.
violin, from a guitar, from a piano, even though they're playing this, the pitch is the same, right? Or if we all sang the same note, right, or sang the same song starting on the same pitch, if we're all singing Happy Birthday together, you're probably going to be able to tell Jeremy's voice from my voice, from Chip's
Yeah.
voice, from Bart's voice, right? That's timbre.
Oh, okay.
And like that is timbre. The fact that everything has a fundamental pitch, right? So when the flute and the saxophone are playing the same fundamental pitch, that's just the fundamental pitch. That's sort of the sounding pitch, like the most prominent pitch. But then there's above that is a whole structure of overtones, right? And it's that structure of overtones that makes the flute sound like a flute and the saxophone sound like a saxophone.
Wow, I've never
Right.
heard it explained like that. Cool.
Yeah, so like
Very
that
well
that is, and everything has a timbre, right? Like the table has a timbre, and our voices have timbre, and any sound has a timbre, and all it is whatever the structure of this is like physics, right? The structure of the sound is the structure of overtones, and with every sound, there's a different series, a different combination, of the overtone series is being heard, and so that's why. And then obviously with mallets, you're taking, whether it's a xylophone or a drum or a timpano or a cymbal, you're able to dial in different profiles of that timbre.
So your bass
Depending
drum
on the
beaters
mallet you
can
use.
change that.
Precisely. And the basic
Nice.
metric is that, you get more fundamental by adding mass, by adding heaviness.
Right. Yeah.
The heavier you make something, the more fundamental you're going to get. But then that also means the heavier you make it, you get more fundamental. You also get more of everything else, right? Like if I were to hit a gong with a steel hammer, it's just going to sound, it's just going to be like a crash. It's just going to be the loudest freaking thing you've ever heard, right?
Mhm.
So, but usually you don't want the gong to sound like that, but you do want that low, sort of bassy, blah kind of a sound from the gong. So what do? We keep the mallet heavy, but then you put padding over it. You make it softer. And by making it softer, what you're doing is you're eliminating the higher partials, the higher overtones, right? Because that softness means that the impact with the instrument happens over a longer period of time. And the longer that implement is in contact with the instrument, whether it's a drum or a cymbal or a gong, that is actually muffling more overtones, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
softness. So the reason soft mallets sound kind of warmer and darker than like wood sticks is because it's eliminating those higher overtones, and therefore all you're really hearing are the low overtones. So with a heavy pair of drumsticks, you're still hearing the fundamental and all that stuff might be just as present, but it's outshined by these higher overtones from the hardness of this. You know what I mean? That isn't because the stick bounces so fast. Does that make sense?
It
Yeah,
does.
no, it does. It really does.
Really well explained. I would just point out to our listeners, like, we've had episodes on our podcast where we've talked forever in the weeds about drum heads and drumhead selection and about sticks and tips and tapers and all the technical stuff that goes into what makes a stick sound different than another stick and a head sound different. We've talked about tuning, but we've never talked about bass drum beaters. And this is a thing that I think, you're missing an opportunity. It's like, why would you assume you spend all this time thinking about what drums you buy and what the wood is and what the shell type and the layers and the head, the tuning and all that. But what about the beater? Like, that's the thing that's actually striking the bass drum, right? And of course, with your sticks, you're so picky about the particular sticks you like and the different ones you use for different applications. Why not be, and here's and Dinesh, you've again filled a niche. It's like the bass drum was sort of like the forgotten piece of the drum kit in terms of timbral, whatever development, let's say, or options. And so now, thanks to what you're doing, there's all these options out there for drummers, and also, a company like Lowboy, I know they got good stuff too. So so check it out. Check out the website. Chip put it in the comments. It's dragonflypercussion.com. I know in addition to making bass drum beaters and also orchestral mallets, you also have this really, really cool like mallet stick attachment where you can turn a pair of drumsticks into a pair of mallets by putting this little attachment on. Do you have any of those handy you can show us?
Yeah, let me see if I can find some of those. Oh, here we go. I'm right here. So this is on just a standard, 5A. I think it's there it is, Vic Firth 5A drumstick, right? And it looks like this. It's called a topper. And this was another pandemic project, actually. As I was designing these, the kick drum beaters, I started designing these, and this was a collaboration with Scott McPherson out of Minneapolis. He founded Tackle Instrument Supply. So if you've ever seen the stick bags and cymbal bags and all that stuff that Tackle makes, I got in touch with him because I was having a stick bag made, and Scott helped me kind of navigate that process of like finding a factory that could make really high quality bags. And so he and I connected, and then it was like the pandemic hit, and we were waiting. The bags were ordered. I was waiting on them. I was calling Scotty and saying, "Hey, do you have any information on these bags?" He's like, "Yeah, they're supposed to be coming in a couple months, and let me reach back." And then at some point I mentioned, like, "Oh yeah, I should," I said, "I'm making some I'm making some kick drum beaters." And he's like, "You're making bass drum beaters?" And he got all excited, we did a FaceTime, and I showed some of the I had all these crude prototypes. He's like, "Oh man, that's amazing. I love that." And he's like, and he showed me some stuff that he'd made years ago. And then in the background, he saw like a timpani mallet I had, or something like that. I was working on some kind of a mallet. He's like, "Whoa, what's that?" And I showed it to him. He's like, "Wait, could you put that on on any kind of a stick?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, yeah, I guess." I was sort of like, and he had this whole idea. He's like, "What if you could make it so that you could have this thing that would go on any drumstick?" And at first I was like, "Scott, I don't know what you're talking about." But then he was like, "No, I really think this could be really useful." And so we started. It was like this. I mean, I feel like so many of us have these stories from the pandemic where it was like, I just remember like my family would go to bed. My kids were pretty little then, they were like, 6 and 9 or whatever. And they'd go to bed early. And then my wife, Janine, and I, we'd watch some TV, and then she'd hit the sack, and then it'd be like 9 or 10 o'clock. And I'd call Scott and we'd FaceTime. And at this point, my workshop was still in my house. It was on the first floor of my house. And so I'd go down to the shop, and Scott would be in his shop, and we'd be on FaceTime. And we were just like, we just like kind of designed these things in real time, like over FaceTime over the course of like a month. I mean, it was like really intense, and trying all these different things, and like coming up with and it's kind of a complicated little piece of gear to make it fit securely enough on a stick, but be able to be removable. And it's a really great sounding mallet. And we've got 3 different models. Like we've got just like the kick drum beaters, we have a hard leather model. That's stacked leather. but it's a little bit of a softer leather than on the kick drum beaters. And we have this medium one that's like flannel and canvas, and then we have this big soft one that's flannel. You know, they make for, and what's nice about it is that if you have a particular drumstick you prefer, you can just throw them on there, and now, you know, you've got yourself a pair of mallets.
Nice.
And they're also, you know, they're the felt timpani mallets they fray out so quickly, you know, especially if you're playing on coated heads.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they're just going to get destroyed. Whereas these just, you know, they kind of wear in. They don't wear out as
Oh,
easily
that's
as
cool.
Well, the other piece of the puzzle there is that you don't have to buy yourself a pair of mallets. You know, you can just buy these toppers, and they're
right.
You know, mallets are very expensive. I don't know if these guys use them, but I do when I'm playing drum set for various things.
And then we also have this guy that's called our low top that goes on the butt end of the stick. You know, so it's the same basic idea. And these have been really popular because it just, you know, it can just turn so many guys want that flip stick option.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Like the swizzle or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And actually now, I mean, starting, like, they're actually on our website, but we haven't released them yet. We are making swizzles. But it's a really different, you know, like, it was sort of meant to be a counterpoint to the low top, because the low top is awesome because it has some weight to it. Right. It sounds really awesome on drums, you know what I mean? And cymbals. Like it's kind of it's a beefy sound. But if you're trying to play like snare drum roll, like in the orchestra, it's a little bit annoying because it's such a large mallet head that it can kind of really, and all the swizzle sticks are like that. Like all the other ones that are on the market, the mallet head on the bottom is like kind of beefy. And so it runs into the back, you know, to the underside of your wrist. And so, like, the way most of us play snare drum rolls, like in an orchestral setting, it sort of makes it hard to play, right? And you can't really get a good roll. So I had made some versions of this years and years ago for a colleague of mine. And it's just stacked flannel, but like this mallet head sounds great, but it's like just a little bit bigger than the diameter of the stick.
Interesting.
So it doesn't hit the back part of your hand.
Yeah. So it's super comfortable. And like, and so we're making it on a concert stick and also on a 5A. And it just makes playing, when you're playing with the regular side of the drumsticks, you don't even know it's there, you know. Then if you need to flip, it's there. So those are, you know, about to be released sometime in the next few days. I'll post on social media. But yeah, we're excited to get these out there. I've had this design and this idea for years. It just took me a long time to get an OEM account with ProMark. I just needed the drumsticks because I don't make drumsticks, you know. So I needed somebody to supply me with a bunch of drumsticks that we could brand for Dragonfly and modify. You know what I mean? So that's what
cool.
We did.
As Jeremy said to you when you guys first met over the internet, we have an event called Deck Day, and it's a day long, you know, all drummers come together, we hang out and for clinics, and it's a lot of fun. And at our second Deck Day that we hosted up at Jeremy's place, Bandworks in the Bay Area, there was a gentleman by the name of Jason Slota that came out, and he has a company called Round Sound Cymbals. He runs it out of his garage, and he sells cymbals, he reworks cymbals, and he was talking about the blacksmithing, and he makes cymbals as well. He's getting into doing this.
Wow.
And it was pretty fascinating to listen to his story. Now I bring him up because this really reminds me not only of Vic Firth's story, but it reminds me of that because it's definitely a DIY thing, right? It's a thing where it's, you know, his thing is blacksmithing and, you know, hammering stuff out. And, you know, I mean, that to me was so intriguing and so cool. And I want to go see it and experience it. And I could see myself at your place, just like, oh my God, how does the lathe work? How does it, I mean, it's an art form in and of itself. And I think it's an art form that, you know, I'm going to sound old here, but, you know, a lot of people are losing that, how to use machineries and how to build things. And I think this is just incredible that you're doing this. It's just absolutely fantastic in so many ways.
Thank you.
Did you And so I guess my question in there is, did you grow up working with tools and machinery and lathes and drill presses and hands-on wrenching on your car kind of guy? Because I did, and I love that stuff. So there's my question.
Yeah, sure. Actually, for the most part, not really. I was always very interested. Like I in hindsight, I realized that as a kid, like I always kind of wanted to be a maker.
Right.
But we didn't have woodworking tools or anything in the house. I mean, my dad was handy enough to work on the, fix a leaky toilet. You know what I mean? And he was competent with tools. You know what I mean? But he was not a maker himself. Like we never had like a workshop space in my house.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I didn't really grow up with that. But then, I studied when I got to high school, I started taking lessons with a guy named Tom Freer, who was in the Cleveland Orchestra. And he has a company called Freer Percussion that makes exclusively, sort of concert percussion gear, super high end. And there is sort of like the state of Ohio is a sort of an interesting cauldron for like mallet companies, to be honest. Like back in the 90s, there was a company called the Clevelander Drum Company. They made, and that was started by Paul Jančić, who was the principal timpanist in the Cleveland Orchestra. He made timpani, he made snare drums, and he made timpani mallets and some xylophone mallets. Really great stuff. And that was like in the early 90s. All through the 90s, that company was going. Black Swamp Percussion, if you're familiar with Black Swamp,
Yep.
They make tambourines and triangles and all kinds of wood blocks and all sorts of sort of concert percussion instruments, snare drums, and amazing company. I mean, Eric Soy is just a true innovator. You know what I mean? And incredible. And he's in Bowling Green, Ohio. JG Percussion he's a timpani mallet maker who was in Southern California, but now his wife is from Norway. He runs his business out of Norway now. But really great high-end timpani mallets. He's from the Cleveland area. There's a guy named Jeff Luft who's got a high-end timpani mallet company out of Cincinnati. So there's just like a bunch of us kind of came from there. And so I think part of it is that like when I was growing up, it was sort of my eyes were open to the fact that, hey, you can start companies. People make mallets, and it's a thing you can do. You can make timpani. You can do this stuff, So there was a little bit of an open-mindedness about that. And then I had a really close friend in high school who his family was like, they had a full like wood shop in their garage, and he and I were super close, and I'd go over there for long. And that's when I really kind of realized like, oh, this stuff is cool. Like I really love this. Like, he and I we used to go find, we'd like talk to, I remember our physics teacher in high school would, we were in like the physics storeroom, where they have all the stuff for running labs, and there was all these metal rods. I was like, hey, what are these? He's like, I don't know, that's from some old piece of machinery. And he gave us these metal rods, and we took them into his garage and fired up the propane tank and like made triangles. You know what I mean?
Really?
Just yeah, it was like super fun. You know what I mean? Just kind of like really got my feet wet with that, with my friend Jacob. And then I just kind of learned as I went. I don't know. I bought a drill press, and then you buy a chop saw, and you buy belt sanders, and you buy a lathe, and and nothing I'm doing is, like more than anything else, like Dragonfly is an assembly company. Like there's not a whole lot of like fabrication in the truest sense. What I'm doing is really just figuring out how do I combine a set of materials to make a great sounding mallet. There's nothing. It's not. What is it? It's a ball on a stick for the most part.
Dinesh,
you don't have sheep in the back room where you're growing the wool.
Yeah, right, exactly. No.
I wanted to know, Dinesh, what would be your favorite product right now? What's your highlight, the standout product of yours? If you had to pick, like, what's your favorite set of mallets?
We have four legs to our stool, right?
Okay.
There's the orchestral stuff that I started with. There's the drum set stuff. We have a school band line that I make for like, school education stuff. And then actually the largest leg of our stool sales wise is sound healing. So making mallets for playing gongs and singing bowls.
Oh, wow.
Which is a really big, it's a big field, with meditation, mindfulness, wellness. yoga. There's a lot, it overlaps with all these things. And so people use these instruments in various capacities, some of it more performative, some of it more therapeutic. And so I could pick products from each of those categories, right? I mean,
Okay.
honest to goodness, if I had to nail it down to one, I would say my kick drum beaters are my favorite thing. Like it's my most favorite innovation. I feel like it's this incredible marriage. So like this idea of stacking layers of fabric to make a mallet, I didn't invent that, right? That's based on an Austrian timpani mallet design. All right, so guys playing in the Vienna Phil and all the different orchestras in Austria started doing this years, like decades ago. You know what I mean? Like many decades ago. It's called Flannelschlager, and and so I bought some flannel mallets years ago when I was in college. Most of us in the States didn't used to use them. They didn't used to be seen at all in the US. Now they've become more commonplace. But anyway, it was always kind of like, well, I don't think it sounds great on timpani, but it's a really cool idea. Like I just thought they were neat. I like that they were durable. They didn't wear out the way felt does. And it always kind of was like perched in my head. And I don't know, that was my little light bulb moment during the pandemic when I'm sitting there, I'm making all these kick drum beater prototypes, and then all of a sudden I got this idea to like, what if I made like a big like, you know what I mean? So I kind of took this idea that was from a totally different part of the industry and put it here, and I'm really proud of that.
It's called flannel. What did they call it?
They called it Flannelschlager. So schlag,
you know what? I had some of that at Oktoberfest one time.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Schlagzeug is German for percussion, right? Schlag, I think, is to hit.
Yeah,
and
there's a
Flannelschlager is flannel hitters, flannel mallets, and that's where it that's where it came from. So I could pick probably one or two products from each of those categories, but it's hard. I mean, we have well over 100 products. It's a lot of products.
Wow,
that's awesome.
Man. And so I think, but I think the kick drum beaters like really kind of nailed it for me. You know what I mean?
That's cool.
Yeah. So you as a working professional percussionist in the Buffalo Philharmonic, that's a full-time gig for most people.
It is a full-time
all
gig,
by itself. Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what I mean to say is that most people don't have another job on top of that job.
Right.
But
so
how do you I want to talk about your work balance.
Yeah. So, so the playing in an orchestra it's an unusual way to make a living. And so, our schedule like no 2 weeks are identical, but it's never a 9 to 5 kind of a situation. It's not like a clock in at 9 a.m. and you're going to be there all day. So depending on what the concert schedule is, we have a rehearsal schedule that goes with it. You know what I mean? And sometimes that can mean as many as 4 or 5 rehearsals in a week, and then another 2 or 3 concerts. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're going to have, 2 youth concerts on Tuesday and 2 youth concerts on Wednesday. And then, we'll have Thursday off, and then we're going to have Friday morning rehearsal, Friday night pops concert, Saturday morning rehearsal, Saturday night different concert, and then Sunday morning rehearsal, Sunday afternoon family concert. You know what I mean? And it just depends on the week of what we're doing. So, and then you have to be prepared on day one of the rehearsals, right? So you have your own preparation and practice that happens outside of that rehearsal time and concert time. So a lot of it is that, we work basically every Saturday night. We have a 40-week season in Buffalo. So for those 40 weeks, we work pretty much every Saturday night. We work, sometimes we have concerts Friday morning and Saturday night. Sometimes we have concerts Friday night, Saturday night, sometimes Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, sometimes all 3. It just depends on the week. So, it's one of those, it's a little bit like being a college professor, right? Insofar as, okay, you have grading, you have to do lesson planning, you have to show up to class and teach. Yeah. Right. You have to have office hours. You have to work, you have to serve on committees. And so, but, my father was a professor at Cleveland State University when I was growing up. And, he always, and he was home a lot. He was usually in his office working, but he had like a certain sort of flexibility that I think most 9-to-5ers don't have. And it's similar being in an orchestra. So it's like, it's enough work, and the schedule is all over the place that nobody could just hold down a 9-to-5 job and play in an orchestra, a full-time orchestra. You couldn't do it. And so it, it is and especially, and then the other piece of it is I'm not only am I percussionist, I am second percussionist. I'm not the principal player. And so I have a little bit more built-in time off based on repertoire. So for instance, last week we had a concert and, I played the overture, which was a Berlioz overture. Then there was a concerto and a symphony. Neither of, the concerto only needed one percussionist. So the principal played. And then the second half was Mendelssohn 4. There's only timpani in Mendelssohn. So that was a really light week for me. You know what I mean? Because I only had to be, I got to skip one rehearsal and then I was done with the concerts really early. So, so it sort of lends itself to what I do because I'm able to sort of, so and so we're always off on Mondays, but I'm always here on Mondays. You know what I mean? So basically what it means is I have a lot of 7-day weeks, but I don't have any single day in that week that I'm working like 8 or 12 hours. You know what I mean?
And you're doing something that I have people say this stuff to me all the time because I go 7 days a week myself.
Right.
But I don't consider, I love what I do, but I don't consider it a job. It's like, I know I've got to be, I don't phone it in. I know I've got to be on top of my game. I know I've got to be ready. I know I've got to be able to answer questions for students. I got to be able to perform. I got to do all these things, but I'm not digging a ditch. I'm not, I'm not busting tires off of a car or a 9-to-5 in an office. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things. It's just, that's not what I do. I love what I do. So I can't, there's never a point where it's like, oh, I got to go do this now,
Yeah. Well, and for a number of years, it was legit, it's kind of like, it's worked out really well. Like I couldn't have started Dragonfly without my orchestra job.
Right.
Like I needed it. I needed it for the R&D and for that's why my stuff is good. Is because I do this for a living and I do it every day. But also it was like, we started really small. We started selling 5 mallets. I mean, our first few years of sales, we were, there, you know what I mean? Like when your gross sales are $30,000 a year, like you're not taking home a lot,
Yeah,
so it took us many years. It took almost a decade before we started realizing meaningful income from Dragonfly. You know what I mean? Like it took a long time, but in that time, we sort of gradually now I've got 3 full-time employees, and
that's what I was just going to ask. Really?
And so without my crew, so now I have a crack team that they do and literally, I mean, it happens all the time where I go to one of my employees and I'm like, how do we make this? What do we do? I haven't, you know what I mean? I designed it, but I designed it 5 years ago and I haven't made a batch of these in years or months sometimes. And so, so I have a great team of employees that are really self-sufficient. They're extremely knowledgeable. And so that allows me to kind of bounce in and out. So some weeks I'm barely here. You know what I mean? Like on busy work weeks where I'm like really jammed, or weeks where it's like, I might not be in rehearsal, but it's like, I've got to book this big of notes I have to learn. And there's only one way to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So some weeks I have to be in the practice room more,
Are your employees drummers? Or is everybody there a drummer or percussionist?
We have one super part-timer who's a drummer, and all he does is pack orders. But that means he's our final quality control guy, and he's great for that because he's a drummer. So like we use a lot of our mallets, our orchestral mallets are on rattan handles. These like flexible cane handles, and like rattan's a super pain in the butt because it has to be paired and the flex has to be the same. But if you're not a drummer, having that aptitude,
you don't know how to
feeling it in the hand and feeling that it's just right is really tricky. It's really hard to train that. So that he's the only drummer though. Everybody else of our 3 full-timers, they basically all have an visual art background, which was not intentional, but it's just how it's worked out. And one of them is also a singer, and she sings professionally and is so that's just how it's worked out. I mean, I don't know. We've just gotten very lucky finding people that really that seem to be really, really good at this. So I mean, like wrapping mallets, there's stuff that I can't do half as well as they do because they've put way more hours into it at this point than I have.
Dinesh, when do you sleep, man? How do you do what you do and keep that fire burning and keep that passion going?
I mean, A, you sleep when you're dead. B, no,
Yep.
but I get enough sleep. I mean, it's, what it is it ends up being a little bit of like death by 1,000 cuts, right? Like I said, like I rarely have, sometimes we have days where it's just like I'm in the shop at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. after I drop my kids at school. And then I'm here just busting my ass right up until rehearsal. And then I go to rehearsal and then I come back to the shop and then I go to a concert. And, all of a sudden you've got a 16-hour day in your hands, but everybody's got to do that. Everybody's got to, sacrifice pounds of their own flesh every now and again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 45 years old. What else am I supposed to be doing with my life?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm in the,
Do it while you can.
I should be hitting it hard, but most of the time it's like, I'll come into the shop in the morning, I'll do my thing. And then, when it's time to go pick up my kids from school, I peace out, I go get the kids. And then, and then the evenings, it's family time. And then, but then the weekends I pay the price because I've got, so it's like, we don't have as many Saturday nights together as a family.
Right.
But I'm always kind of working. And it's like, and if I have one movement off in a piece at the orchestra, I'm backstage, I'm back there sending emails or sourcing material. I mean, I do a lot of creative work and a lot of busy work when I'm at the music hall, but I'm not needed at that moment. I don't play the concerto. So
how do you stay effective changing hats like that? How do you keep your tools sharp?
I mean, I have to keep practicing. I mean, I practice, basically I hit a drum pad every day, you know what I mean? And then the rest of my practice is sort of, necessary. It depends on what we're doing that week in the orchestra, you know what I mean? So, but like if I have a 10 o'clock rehearsal, I usually get there by 8:30 or 9 in the morning. So I build in a 90-minute warm-up session and set up.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of my prep, but if I'm there at 8:30 for a 10 o'clock rehearsal, I'm there practicing music for the following week. You know what I mean? Like I'm not working on the music. I'm not there to learn the notes for that day. I've already taken care of that.
Too late for that.
Yeah. And I've been in the orchestra for 21 years now. So there's a certain amount of like, I've put my 10,000 hours in. So depending on what the repertoire is, I'm not needing to put the same kind of time in that I did 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
When I was still kind of taking my first swing at a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I mean, like now we do a lot of movies, like movies with like film with orchestra playing the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And, so like we're doing the Harry Potters and like, man, there's no shortcut for those things. I mean, they're just an absolute bear. I mean, it's just like 150 pages of notes and, it just takes a lot of weeks of practice and preparation and,
Wow.
They did that with Pacific Symphony. I'm sorry. I mean, what they did was they did all the old 1970s Bugs Bunny cartoons. And
oh God, that's a beast of a book.
God, man, it's incredible.
The xylophone book is an absolute nightmare on that stuff. So it just kind of goes, but then then we'll do a week where it's a 19th century repertoire that I've played 1,000 times, and I brush it off. If I have to play tambourine that week, I'll get the tambourine out before work and do my stuff and make sure I'm kind of where I need to be with it, and then I'm ready to go. So part of it is the luxury of being mid-career too, that I'm just not, it's but it just, like I said, it just varies week to week, and that's just sort of, but the good thing is that Dragonfly can run itself without me on a daily basis. Right, like we're able to fulfill, my wife does all the, she does all the fulfillment and all the HR and all the bookkeeping and all that kind of stuff, so she's here every day.
You're like Walt Disney and she's like Roy. You're the dreamer and she's like taking care of the stuff.
She is the one, exactly. Like, we talk all the time, like, where if one of us gets hit by a bus tomorrow, which is worse?
You're in trouble.
Definitely worse if it's her. Let me put it that way, like, because you know what I mean. Like, if I get hit by a bus, it just means Dragonfly doesn't invent any new mallets. But if she gets hit by a bus, I'm literally like, I don't know how to. Like, we have bank accounts. I don't know. So.
First the peanut butter, then the jelly. Right?
Yeah.
So I, but I think at the end of the day, it's like I'm extremely busy. I lose track of things. Like I struggle with correspondence, right? Like I get behind on emails and then I forget, or like some people text me, some people message me on Instagram, some people send us an email, and I'm like, like I get a little overwhelmed with that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like when we're here at Dragonfly, I'm my own boss. It's our baby, and it's on our terms, and it's like,
Yeah.
if we want to take a vacation some week and take the family and go somewhere, like there might be a consequence for that, but we can do it if we want,
Yeah.
like that's the luxury we have, so
that's the great thing about working for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, we try to have a pretty good perspective about that, because it's a pretty good life. You know what I mean? Because my orchestra job is, in some ways, like the weekend thing can be tiresome, especially with kids. But man, I wouldn't trade it for. I mean, like when I think about working like a real job, like
Right.
it really freaks me out. So
Yeah.
I'm very glad that I get to go make music. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're all
Awesome.
in that same boat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, before we go, I just want to do a quick summary for those of our guests who just tuned in sort of partway through the show. Dragonfly makes mallets and bass drum beaters and orchestral percussion stuff, and you should check out their stuff. We have the website in the chat. It's dragonflypercussion.com. Their beaters are awesome. They're really different sounding than the ones that you're familiar with, your typical hard felt and hard plastic. This gives you a range of options for different timbral expression on your drums. So check out their products. They're really, really great. And Dinesh, thank you for coming on our show and taking the time to talk to us and sharing your story. It's great to hear, and we love what you're doing, and think it's just awesome.
Thank you guys so much. It was really fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think you're going to be getting some orders for some bass drum beaters from us, and then also hopefully from some of our listeners too.
Love it.
But man, keep doing what you're doing, and good luck with the family and with your Philharmonic job. It's great.
Appreciate it so much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
All right,
much,
guys.
Dinesh.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week, and appreciate you guys. Keep practicing.
I'll play us out again like Rick does.
All right. I don't know about your timbra.